A hospital in China's northeast tested a doctor 4 different ways for the virus, but the official statement is raising questions. While the Chinese regime was claiming there was no virus outbreak at the beginning of the year, customs data show they imported 2 billion masks. China's economy took an especially hard hit from the virus pandemic, losing billions of dollars in revenue in the first quarter. Secretary Pompeo said that China knew about the CCP virus as early as November. Find out what the regime did with important samples of the virus instead of sharing them with other countries. And in U.S. prisons, thousands of inmates showing no symptoms, but tests show unexpected results.
Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. On Friday, the Liaoning Province CDC that a Dr. Li at a local hospital in Xinyang City was tested using 4 different methods. 3 came back negative and 1 came back positive. The CDC did not conclude that she tested positive or not. It just announced she cannot infect other people. But a video published on social media on Friday shows the entrance to the same hospital was blocked off. The person taking the video says they found 1 case last night at the Liaoning Provincial Hospital in Xinyang City. Now no one is allowed to enter. Police are blocking the entrance. We asked a doctor from another hospital in the same city. He said Dr. Li had been diagnosed as an asymptomatic infection. He added the hospital where Dr. Li works doesn't accept patients anymore. One of his own patients needed to go to that hospital for treatment but was refused because of special reasons. This doctor said neither doctors nor patients have been told the truth. It's dangerous and medical staff are worried. According to local media reports in China, an expert team has been sent to the southwest border. The head of the Chinese expert panel on outbreak response is leading the team. But all online articles related to this topic were removed. Netizens asking what's happening in the southwest and if there's an outbreak there. The southwest province of Yunnan shares a 2,500-mile-long border with Myanmar, Laos, and Vietnam. According to a local media report, state officials said on March 31st, it has become the, quote, front line to prevent infections from entering the country. An AP report says China closed a border crossing with Myanmar on Friday after fighting in the country spilled over into Chinese province and damaged buildings. A Southeast Asian news outlet reported that all travel between China and Myanmar had been suspended for 60 days. It quoted a local Myanmar official as saying the order came from the Yunnan provincial government to control the spread of the virus, and Chinese police and soldiers would be deployed at border checkpoints for security. Chinese authorities say there are no local cases in Yunnan, but the figure is very likely underreported. The economic shock from the pandemic has also hit the Chinese regime's pocket. According to data released by Chinese officials, fiscal revenue for March fell over a quarter compared to a year ago. In the first 3 months of the year, fiscal revenue fell over 14%. According to Chinese media reports, one staff member at a provincial department of finance says one region has lost over 50% of its revenue, and some local governments are having trouble paying their workers and bills. Now to face masks. Ms. Qian, a Taiwanese immigrant, works at the California subsidiary of a Chinese state-owned company. She told us it was like a political task to donate masks from the U.S. to China at the beginning of the outbreak. We've given her a pseudonym to protect her identity. She told us in January the branch she works at started fundraising, asking employees to donate money for sending masks to China. She said there was even a quota for each branch in competition between branches to see which one can raise the most money. The fundraising target was $50,000. The subsidiary company she works for sent 16,000 masks to China. Qian said that to her this felt more, quote, political than charitable, and she reluctantly donated $25. She said she doesn't understand why China needed to source masks from abroad since it produces so many itself. According to Chinese custom data, over a 5-week period beginning in late January, China imported 2 billion masks. That equals 2.5 months of global production. China also imported 400 million pieces of personal protective equipment, including goggles and protective gowns. And now to China's disinformation campaign amid the pandemic. The EU's Foreign and Defense Ministry released a special report saying there is evidence of official Chinese sources deflecting any blame for the outbreak of the pandemic. So how is China pushing its narrative? According to the report, it's through ads. These ads include pushing the narrative that the virus came from the U.S. while deflecting blame from China. Chinese officials have since responded, trying to block the report. While they didn't block it, they were able to delay it. The report was originally scheduled to be published on the 21st, but was pushed back to the 24th. According to Reuters, the report was still released but was watered down and took a softer stance on China. Originally, it said China has continued to run a global disinformation campaign to deflect blame for the outbreak of the pandemic and improve its international image. Both overt and covert tactics have been observed. But the public version released days later said state-backed sources from various governments, including Russia and to a lesser extent, China. According to the New York Times, this was because China threatened reactions if the report wasn't adjusted. South Korean news outlet Daily NK recently reported that a North Korean man who attempted to defect to China tested positive for the CCP virus and is currently in quarantine in a hospital in China. Daily NK said the man was shot by a Chinese border guard while trying to cross the Tumen River. He was taken to a hospital where he tested positive for the CCP virus. The hospital has since banned visitors. North Korea says it has had no virus infection since the start of the outbreak, making the international community suspect a cover-up. The man who translated a diary of life at the epicenter has been verbally attacked on Chinese social media platform Weibo. Some called him foreign garbage or white pig, saying the more he translates, the more Americans will die. Award-winning Chinese author Fang Fang kept an online diary about her lockdown life in Wuhan. Her book Wuhan Diary has drawn criticism from the Chinese Communist Party's 50-cent army or state-backed internet trolls and Little Pink, young Chinese nationalists blinded by the regime's propaganda. A netizen said on Twitter, Michael Berry's Weibo account turned into a battlefield after he translated Fang Fang's diary. Critics flocked to his account with horrible verbal assaults. In a Twitter post on April 23rd, Berry said the assaults have been nasty, referring to the Weibo attack. He expressed his gratitude to those who defended him. Fang Fang agreed to publish her diary with two well-known publishing houses in the U.S. and Germany. It is expected to be released this summer. State Secretary Mike Pompeo said this week that China knew about the CCP virus as early as November. He called on China to be more transparent with data and share early virus samples.
In a Thursday interview with media, State Secretary Mike Pompeo said that China knew about the CCP virus as early as November, but to this day failed to share actual samples of it. He says it's putting the world's people at risk. He also said on Wednesday the lack of early samples are causing difficulty in understanding the virus.
The CCP still has not shared the virus sample from inside of China with the outside world, making it impossible to track the disease's evolution.
Understanding the virus is critical for scientists to develop test kits, come up with prevention measures and treatments, and develop vaccines. But the Chinese regime hasn't allowed the rest of the world to access the precious data.
It censored those who tried to warn the world. It ordered a halt to testing of new samples, and it destroyed existing samples.
According to an internal document widely quoted by Chinese media and local government websites, Beijing authorities ordered all Chinese institutions to destroy the virus samples. It also prohibited them from sharing the information with the outside world. The document was issued to local health officials on January 3rd. It also forbade Chinese institutions from publishing any relevant research paper or lab results without official permission. In addition, the Chinese regime shut down a lab in Shanghai 1 day after the facility published the virus genome sequence on foreign websites. The lab was the first inside China to release that information. This might partially explain the scarcity of data on the virus among other governments. Pompeo promised that the Chinese regime will pay a price for what they did and said that the goal right now is to control the virus. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
The Trump administration is calling out China, alleging the country is trying to hack multiple U.S. agencies to steal CCP virus research. U.S. officials say there has been a wave of cyber attacks targeting the Department of Health and Human Services, hospitals, and labs. The HHS oversees the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The agency has reportedly been struck by a daily surge of cyber attacks. Justice Department officials say there is nothing more valuable right now than biomedical research related to vaccine treatments for the CCP virus. Cyber attack groups linked to China have reportedly carried out campaigns against the U.S. The World Health Organization said on Saturday there is no evidence that people who have recovered from the virus and have antibodies are protected from a second round of infection.
In a scientific brief, the agency warned governments against issuing immunity passports or risk-free certificates to people who have been infected, as their immunity is not guaranteed. The practice could actually increase the risks of spreading coronavirus, as people who have recovered may ignore advice on taking precautions. Chile said last week it would begin handing out health passports to people who had developed antibodies to the virus. They could immediately rejoin the workforce. The WHO said it continued to review the evidence on antibody responses to COVID-19. Most studies have shown those who have recovered do have antibodies to the virus, but others have shown very low levels of neutralizing antibodies in their blood, which suggests an immune response that does not involve antibodies may be critical for recovery. Some 2.8 million people have been reported to be infected with coronavirus globally, and more than 195,000 have died from it, according to a Reuters tally.
A British microchip company is in the spotlight after an investor linked to the Chinese Communist Party tried to seize control of its board. Their attempt failed after the UK government intervened. But British lawmakers want to question those involved. Our UK correspondent Jane Werrell has more.
A storm in the UK this month as a Chinese state investor tried to take over British chip designer Imagination Technologies. The company supplies graphic chips to Apple. Some fear that the virus crisis could be used as a cover for controversial transactions like this one. An inquiry launched by politicians in the UK Foreign Affairs Committee is investigating those involved in them. Imagination Technologies was bought by Canyon Bridge in 2017. Canyon Bridge's main investor is Chinese state-owned company China Reform Holdings. Earlier this month, news surfaced that Canyon Bridge tried to appoint 4 new directors from China Reform Holdings to Imagination's board, effectively taking control of the company. The takeover plans were cancelled after the UK government intervened.
It sparked resignations from senior executives of the firm, but a spokesperson from Imagination Technologies told NTD on Friday that the only resignation they now have is the CEO, Ron Black, and that the search for his replacement, who they say will be independent of Canyon Bridge, has begun.
2 top executives agreed to come back. According to Sky News, one of them, the chief product officer, wrote in his resignation letter that China Reform have clearly set out to take control of the business for reasons best known to themselves, and I will not be part of a company that is effectively controlled by the Chinese government. There are signs of a growing reluctance to allow Chinese investment in UK businesses, partly because of the Chinese regime's handling of the pandemic.
All investment out of China is strategic when it comes to technology. And they have been monitoring outflows of exchange to ensure that it's only going towards things that the Chinese Communist Party approves of.
Recently, the former chief of Britain's MI6 Foreign Intelligence Service said the West needs to do more to be independent of China. He also supported efforts to stop China from buying up Imagination Technologies. Reports say the Trump administration is also investigating the attempted UK takeover. Canyon Bridge similarly tried to take over American chipmaker Lattice in 2017, but it was blocked by the Trump administration. Witnesses involved in the saga are expected to give evidence at an online UK parliamentary session next month. Jane Werrell, NTD News, London.
The U.S. virus hotspot, New York, continues to see signs of brighter days ahead. And with over 900,000 Americans confirmed to have the CCP virus, some are concerned the measures taken to fight the spread may infringe on their rights. Protesters are pushing back against extended stay-at-home orders, others protesting local police using drones to enforce social distancing. NTD's Melina Weisskopf has more.
Virus spread may be easing up in the nation's hardest-hit state. For the first time in weeks, New York's number of new cases per day dropped from 1,300 to 1,100.
Total hospitalizations down again. If you look at that overall curve, that is the mountain, little perspective.
Still, nearly 500 New Yorkers are passing away from the CCP virus every day. And the state is still under lockdown until May 15th. As for other states, Maryland and Virginia are among the latest to map out plans for recovery, but some say it's not soon enough. Protests sparked there earlier this week, with others happening in Wisconsin. While golf courses are now open, the state extended its stay-at-home order until May 26th.
Well, I'm here today because we think there's been a major overstep in our rights.
And in Connecticut, another group expressing concerns for rights violations. A local police department almost began using drones to enforce social distancing, but dropped the idea after pushback from residents. Drones made by Chinese company DJI are now being used in 22 states, but have drawn criticism from lawmakers and experts. Federal agencies already flagged the company, suspecting it of sending data to the Chinese Communist regime. Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
Over 50,000 Americans have died from the CCP virus, but as it now stands, more than double that number have fought it. The nation seeing over 100,000 recoveries. And unexpected test results among inmates in the U.S. Thousands who are symptom-free are testing positive in 4 state prisons.
2,300 inmates were tested at an Ohio state prison. The mass testing resulted in over 2,000 positives at the Marion Correctional Institution. On top of that, close to 95% of them had no symptoms. And it's not just in Ohio. Michigan's Department of Correction also implemented mass testing and likewise found a higher number of positive cases than expected.
And before all this started, we were at less than 100 positives. So we've discovered basically already in the matter of 2 or 3 days, 500 prisoners who were positive, who previously had not been reporting symptoms.
Through its investigations across 4 state prisons, Reuters found that 96% of over 3,200 inmates who tested positive were symptom-free. Professor Michelle Deitch said social distancing isn't really possible in jails.
Prisons and jails are petri dishes for the spread of the COVID virus. They are very densely populated, and there's no meaningful ability to socially distance within those facilities.
She also said prisons don't have sufficient protocols for hygiene. The Marion Correctional Institution did not immediately respond to comment. Goudt said these results show how important it is to ramp up testing, not just in prison, but anywhere where many people congregate.
In Texas, vinyl record enthusiasts can now take their goods to go. The state is starting to reopen and retail shops are allowed to operate, but only for delivery or pickup.
Today is the first day that the state of Texas has opened up non-essential retail. People will enjoy this service. They'll enjoy curbside. My name is Chris Penn. I'm one of the co-owners of Good Records, independent record store that's been open for 20 years. People are listening to albums again as an event during this time, and it's people are sharing that within their families that they're quarantined with. It's been pretty nice to connect with a customer that way. How are you? Thank you so much. There's only so much you can eat and so many board games and so many shows you can watch on streaming television. So it's music is a very therapeutic thing, and it gives people a way to escape reality for a little bit. I'll see you later.
Why do you think this is something you feel like you had to do today?
Well, there's a few records that came out that I'm collecting a series of them. Today was the release day.
I do wish I could go into the store, but as a alternative, it's not a bad alternative.
I've got a little trepidation. We might be rushing things in general to save the economy, which is already going to be hurting. It's hard to tell how long this is going to go on, and for now I'm happy to serve people safely, and I'm excited to be doing something. Keep saying.
And yet another cruise ship has been affected by the virus. The disease spread among crew members who were doing maintenance on the ship.
Nearly 150 infections have been confirmed aboard an Italian cruise ship. It's currently docked in Japan, carrying only crew members for now. There are no passengers currently on board, as the vessel's tour was halted due to virus concerns. Only one crew member was brought to the hospital. The others showed only slight symptoms or none at all. Britain passed the grim milestone of over 20,000 virus deaths on Saturday. Back in March, the government said that keeping the death toll below 20,000 would be a good outcome. Now it's facing heavy criticism over its response to the outbreak. Prime Minister Boris Johnson is still recovering after testing positive earlier this month. France works to make sure it's safe before it begins to lift lockdown restrictions next month. The country aims to carry out at least 500,000 tests per week until then. And in Germany, as officials battle the virus, they're now facing yet another challenge. After an exceptionally dry April, and with summer still 2 months away, concern is rising that a lack of rain could lead to dangerous forest fires. One blaze was already put out earlier this week.
After more than a month of strict lockdown, some Berlin residents came out to protest the measures, but others see value in the quiet days at home. NTD's Germany correspondent Christian Watchin has more.
In central Berlin today, protesters stood their ground against police. The people demanded an end to the strict lockdown measures. They argued with police officers that their constitutional rights had been violated. All over Germany, social distancing rules are still in place to slow the spread of the CCP virus. What do Berliners under lockdown miss the most?
To see my children. My son's turning 50 and I'd like to be there. We don't see each other at all. They don't want to be responsible for possibly infecting their mom.
This week, officials started to ease some restrictions. Smaller stores are now allowed to reopen. Restaurants, theaters, and other entertainment venues are still closed, but not everyone misses them.
Not too much, actually. I find it much easier or much fun, actually, to stay at home.
And some see the lockdown as an opportunity.
And this quieting down of commercial life, at least, gives us that time to reflect on what's really important and where we should be focusing our attention. And what are the types of ideals and ethics that we want to strive to.
Chancellor Angela Merkel this week said Germany is still at the beginning of the pandemic. She cautions not to ease restrictions too quickly. Reporting by Christian Watchin, NTD News, Berlin.
In Europe, the outbreak comes along with an economic crisis for some countries. The EU Commission has been asked to work on a recovery plan, but it faces challenges. Our France correspondent David Vives has the details.
Italy is suffering one of the highest death tolls from the CCP virus. The third largest economy in the EU zone, it's also facing severe economic shocks from the pandemic. The Italian government on Friday expanded its budget deficit by nearly $60 billion. Its debt will jump to nearly 156% of its GDP. Economist Gabriel Jimenez Roche says there's a serious risk that some countries, like Italy, won't pay.
There's a serious risk that some countries, like Italy, won't pay.
European Union leaders Thursday asked the Executive Commission to urgently work out a plan for the bloc's economic recovery after the pandemic. But the negotiations for joint EU financing are slow, owing to different levels of public debt among member states. Jimenez Roche says the pandemic highlights the contrast between countries with good public debt management, like Germany, and those without.
Countries that have managed their public debt well are now in a better position to negotiate. That's because they don't think the confinement will last long, but if it does, it would spell trouble for everybody.
According to the EU's industry chief Thierry Breton, an economic support package being ready to help the European Union recover from the Chinese virus may need to be worth around $1.7 trillion. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
Life has been continuing pretty much as normal for a group of surfers in Norway. Mostly unaffected by lockdown measures there, they've been hitting the waters of the picturesque Lofoten Islands.
A small group of surf enthusiasts have been able to take advantage of Norway's flexible lockdown rules to ride the waves of the Arctic waters off of the spectacular Lofoten Islands. Surrounded by snow-capped mountains that plunge into the sea, the chain of islands above the Arctic Circle is home to unique cold water reefs, a centuries-old fishing culture, and a thriving population of whales. One of the intrepid surfers is Norway's national surf coach, Shannon Ainsley.
There are no sharks, I'm from South Africa, there's plenty of sharks there, there's no sharks here. And yeah, I've got a good work opportunity, so I work and live here with Lofoten Surf Centre and Go Surf, and life's good.
Recent years have seen a number of surfers move to the region in search of the perfect wave, in a setting that enjoys midnight sun in summer and the northern lights in winter. Norway's lockdown, imposed in mid-March, is less strict than many other countries in Europe. People have been allowed to leave home as long as they abide by the rules, which suits the Lofoten surfers. The country is also gradually reopening elsewhere as well. Kindergarten started on Monday and elementary schools will resume next week.
A Hong Kong man who fled to Taiwan has opened the doors of a new bookshop. The democracy activist left Hong Kong because he feared another brutal run-in with the Chinese regime. Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen offering him congratulations.
A Hong Kong bookseller opened a new shop in Taiwan on Saturday after fleeing to the democratic island amid fears of Chinese persecution. Taiwanese crowded into a shop in Taipei as support as senior officials from the ruling party joined in. President Tsai Ing-wen also offered her congratulations by sending flowers with a short message. Lam Wing-Kee sought refuge in Taiwan last year after he was detained by Chinese agents for 8 months in 2015, while working at a bookshop in Hong Kong that sold books critical of the Chinese leadership. His Causeway Bay books became a symbol of resistance to perceived Chinese encroachments on Hong Kong's liberties. He made front-page headlines again earlier this week after a man threw red paint at him, just days before the reopening. As authorities are still looking for the assailant, Lam said he was happy Taiwanese friends came over to the shop to show their support. Taiwan has become a refuge for a small but growing number of pro-democracy protesters fleeing Chinese-ruled Hong Kong. The democratic island has voiced its strong support for the protesters and repeatedly rejected Beijing's proposal to rule the island with the one country, two systems model it uses for Hong Kong.
Here at China in Focus, we dedicate ourselves to bringing you truthful, unbiased reporting. Don't forget to subscribe for the latest updates and see you next time.